Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud for 19 years, and he believed he understood sacrifice. He had worked his way up from homelessness to success, knew what it meant to struggle for a dream, and thought he had heard every story of perseverance that existed. But on that humid August afternoon in 2024, when a soft-spoken woman named Maria Santos stood at the Family Feud podium with her 4 children, Steve had no idea he was about to hear a confession that would stop production completely, bring Hart and crew members to their knees in tears, and reveal the kind of maternal sacrifice that most people only read about in history books. What Maria was about to reveal would expose the brutal reality of immigrant struggles and the lengths a mother will go to save her children's lives. Before we dive into Maria's extraordinary story, if you believe in honoring the sacrifices our parents make, the courage of immigrant families, and the power of a mother's love to overcome impossible odds, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. What you're about to hear will change how you think about the people who risk everything for a chance at a better life. The Santos family from Los Angeles, California, stood ready to compete against the Chen family from San Francisco. Maria Santos was 41 years old, a small woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a modest blue dress that looked carefully chosen but inexpensive. Her hands were rough and calloused, the hands of someone who worked with them every day. Beside her stood her children, and it was the children who immediately captured the audience's attention. There was Isabella, 18, a beautiful young woman with her mother's dark eyes and a quiet dignity in her posture. Next to Isabella stood 16-year-old Diego, tall and serious, with protective body language as he stood close to his mother. Then came 13-year-old Sofia, wearing glasses and carrying a small notebook, her expression both nervous and excited. And finally, there was 10-year-old Miguel, the youngest, fidgeting with excitement but staying close to his siblings. The 5th member of their team was Maria's brother, 45-year-old Carlos, who had immigrated to the United States 15 years earlier and whose presence seemed to provide an anchor of stability for the family. During introductions, Steve Harvey worked his way down the line with his characteristic warmth and humor. When he got to Maria, he asked his standard questions. "So Maria, tell me about yourself. What do you do?" Maria's English was accented but clear, spoken carefully as if each word required effort. "I work as a housekeeper, Mr. Harvey. I clean houses, offices, whatever work I can find. I work very hard for my children." Steve nodded approvingly. "That's honest work, nothing to be ashamed of. And you've got 4 beautiful children here. They must make you very proud." Maria's eyes filled with tears immediately, and her voice shook as she responded. "They are my everything, Mr. Harvey. They are why I breathe, why I work, why I am here in this country. Everything I have done for them." There was something in her voice, an intensity that went beyond typical parental pride, that made Steve pause. He looked at Maria more closely, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes, the premature aging that hard work and worry had etched into her face, the way her children gathered protectively around her. "Where are you from originally, Maria?" Steve asked gently. "El Salvador, Mr. Harvey. We came to the United States 3 years ago." Steve smiled warmly. "Well, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And how are you all liking California?" Isabella, the oldest daughter, spoke up. "Mr. Harvey, we love it here. We're safe here. We can go to school without being afraid. We can walk down the street without." Her voice caught, and she looked at her mother, who placed a gentle hand on her daughter's arm. Maria finished her daughter's sentence quietly. "Without being afraid of gangs, of violence, of being killed. That is why we came here, to be safe, to give my children a future." The studio audience was very quiet now, sensing that there was a deeper story here, something profound lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly normal Family Feud introduction. Steve, with his instinct for reading people and moments, felt it too. The game began, and the Santos family played with surprising skill and coordination. Isabella was clearly brilliant, giving thoughtful answers that frequently topped the board. Diego was strategic, carefully considering each response. Sofia consulted her notebook between rounds, revealing that she had studied Family Feud questions and common answers just like so many contestants before her. Even young Miguel contributed, his childish answers occasionally surprising everyone by being exactly right. Maria herself was a steady player, not flashy but reliable, giving solid answers that kept her family in the game. By the third round, the Santos family had built a comfortable lead over the Chen family, who were gracious competitors, clearly moved by something they sensed about the Santos family's story. The turning point came in the fourth round. The question seemed simple enough, typical Family Feud material about everyday life. Name something a parent might sell to pay for their child's education. The Chen family had control and had already revealed three answers: jewelry, car, and collectibles. They struck out on vacation home, and control passed to the Santos family for a chance to steal. The Santos family huddled together, whispering urgently in a mixture of English and Spanish. After a moment, they broke apart, and it was clear they had made a decision. Isabella looked at her mother with an expression that seemed to be asking permission for something. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded almost imperceptibly. Isabella stepped up to the podium to give their answer. But before she could speak, Maria gently moved her daughter aside and took the podium herself. "Mr. Harvey," Maria said, her voice trembling but determined, "I need to change the answer. I need to give a different answer. And I need to tell you something, to tell everyone something, because I cannot keep pretending anymore." Steve Harvey's smile faltered slightly. He looked at Maria with concern and curiosity. "Okay, Maria, what do you want to tell us?" Maria took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for so long that they could no longer be contained. "The question is what a parent might sell to pay for their child's education, but that is not the question I am answering. The question I am answering is, what did I sell? What did I sell to bring my children here, to save their lives, to give them a future? And Mr. Harvey, I sold everything. I sold everything I owned in the world." The studio fell into complete silence. Steve stood perfectly still, his microphone hand frozen in midair. Maria continued, tears now streaming down her face, but her voice growing stronger. "In El Salvador, the gangs controlled everything. They came to my house when Diego was 13. They said he had to join them, had to sell drugs for them, had to kill for them. They said if he refused, they would kill him and kill the rest of my family. I had already lost my husband to gang violence 2 years before. They shot him in the street because he refused to pay their extortion money. I watched my children become more afraid every day. Isabella was afraid to go to school because the gangs recruited girls too, forced them into prostitution. Sophia stopped playing outside because it was not safe. Miguel had nightmares every night." Maria's voice broke completely, but she forced herself to continue. "I knew we had to leave. I knew if we stayed in El Salvador, my children would die or become part of the violence that was destroying our country. But leaving required money, Mr. Harvey. Money I did not have. Money nobody in my neighborhood had because we were all poor, all struggling, all terrorized by the same gangs." She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "So I sold everything. I sold my house, the house my husband and I had worked for 10 years to buy. I sold all our furniture, our television, our refrigerator, everything in that house. I sold my wedding ring, the only thing I had left of my husband. I sold the small jewelry my mother had given me before she died. I sold our clothes except for one outfit each for the journey. I sold my children's toys, their books, everything they owned. I sold it all, Mr. Harvey. Every single thing my family possessed, I sold to strangers for whatever money they would give me." The audience was crying now. Steve Harvey's face was a mask of shock and grief. Maria's children were sobbing, holding each other. Carlos, her brother, had his head in his hands, but Maria kept talking, needing to finish, needing to tell the truth she had been carrying for 3 years. Even after selling everything, it was not enough money. The coyotes, the people who smuggle migrants across the border, they wanted $8,000 per person. I had 5 people. That is $40,000. I only had about $25,000 from selling everything we owned. So I borrowed money from loan sharks in El Salvador, dangerous people who charge impossible interest rates. I borrowed $15,000, knowing I might never be able to pay it back, knowing they might come after my brother Carlos, who was already here in the United States, knowing I was putting everyone at risk. But I did it anyway because the alternative was watching my children die. Maria's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the silent studio. We left El Salvador with nothing but the clothes on our backs and small backpacks. We traveled through Guatemala and Mexico, walking, riding in the backs of trucks, hiding from police and immigration officials. We were robbed twice on the journey. Men with guns took what little money I had hidden in my clothes for emergencies. We went days without proper food. We slept on the ground, in abandoned buildings, anywhere we could find. Sophia got sick with a fever and I had no medicine, no doctor, nothing to help her except prayer. Miguel cried for his bed, for his toys, for his life back home, and all I could tell him was that we were going to somewhere better, somewhere safe, even though I did not know if we would make it. Steve Harvey was crying openly now, not trying to hide it, just standing there with tears streaming down his face as this small woman revealed the depth of sacrifice and suffering she had endured. It took us 42 days to get from El Salvador to the United States border, Maria continued. 42 days of fear and hunger and exhaustion. When we finally crossed into the United States, when we finally made it to my brother Carlos's apartment in Los Angeles, I had nothing left. No money, no possessions, no home to return to, even if we wanted to go back. Just my children, alive and safe, and that was everything. Maria looked directly at Steve, then at the cameras, then at the audience. For 3 years, I have been working every job I can find. I clean houses from 6 in the morning until noon. Then I clean offices from 1 in the afternoon until 6. Then I work in a restaurant kitchen from 7 at night until midnight. I work 7 days a week, Mr. Harvey, every single day for 3 years. So I can pay rent for the small apartment where we live, so I can buy food for my children, so I can slowly pay back the loan sharks in El Salvador so they do not hurt my family there. I am exhausted always. My body hurts always. But my children are in school. They are learning English. They are safe. Isabella is graduating high school next year, and she has been accepted to UCLA with a scholarship. Diego wants to be an engineer. Sophia wants to be a doctor. Miguel just wants to play soccer and be a child, which is all I ever wanted for any of them. Maria's legs seemed to give out slightly, and Isabella rushed to support her mother. But Maria straightened herself and finished what she needed to say. The question was, what would a parent sell for their child's education? But Mr. Harvey, I did not sell everything for education. I sold everything for life. I sold everything so my children could live, could have a future, could become the people they are meant to be instead of becoming victims or perpetrators of violence. And I would do it again. I would sell everything again and again if that is what it took to save them. The studio was filled with the sounds of crying, audience members sobbing openly, crew members wiping their eyes. Even the security guards in the corners had tears streaming down their faces. Steve Harvey stood there completely overwhelmed, unable to speak, unable to do anything except feel the weight of what he had just heard. Finally, he walked over to Maria and simply pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried. Her children gathered around them, all of them crying together. Carlos joined them, and the Family Feud stage became a space of raw, unfiltered human emotion that transcended entertainment, transcended television, transcended everything except the acknowledgement of a mother's sacrifice and a family survival against impossible odds. After several minutes, Steve gently released Maria and turned to signal the producers. "We need to stop," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We need to take a break. This is bigger than the game. This is bigger than the show. We need to stop." The producers immediately agreed, and the audience was asked to remain seated while the Santos family was taken to a private area backstage. Steve went with them, along with a counselor and several producers, who were all visibly shaken by what they had just witnessed. In the private room, Maria apologized repeatedly for disrupting the show, for revealing so much, for making a scene. "I am so sorry, Mr. Harvey," she said through tears. "I did not mean to ruin your program. When I heard that question, I could not pretend anymore. I could not give a normal answer when my answer is so much more than that. I needed people to understand what parents do for their children, what immigrant parents sacrifice, what it really costs to seek a better life." Steve knelt down in front of Maria's chair so he could look her in the eyes. Maria, you listened to me very carefully. You did not ruin anything. What you just did was one of the bravest things I have ever witnessed. You told a truth that millions of people need to hear. You gave a voice to countless immigrant families who have made similar sacrifices, but whose stories are never told, never acknowledged. You honored every parent who has ever had to make impossible choices to protect their children. You did not ruin my show. You elevated it to something more important than it has ever been. He took her hands in his. And I promise you, we are going to help you. Family Feud is going to help you. I am personally going to help you. Because what you have done for your children, the sacrifice you have made, that deserves to be supported and celebrated, not ignored or dismissed. Over the next hour, in that private room, Maria told a fuller version of her story. She described life in El Salvador in detail, the constant fear, the corruption, the violence that had become so normalized that children grew up knowing which streets to avoid, which gang signs meant what, how to recognize when violence was about to erupt. She described her husband Roberto's murder, how he had been killed in front of their house while she and the children watched from the window, how the police did nothing because they were either corrupt or terrified themselves, how she had to bury her husband knowing his killers would never face justice. She described the specific day when gang members came to recruit Diego, how they had surrounded him on his way home from school, how they had threatened him with machetes, how Diego had come home terrified and begging his mother to let them leave, to go anywhere else, to escape. She described making the decision to flee, the guilt of abandoning her country, her culture, her extended family who could not come with them, the terror of not knowing if they would survive the journey, the shame of having to borrow money from dangerous people. Maria described the journey north in heartbreaking detail. She talked about the night sleeping in the desert, keeping her children close to protect them from scorpions and snakes and men who preyed on vulnerable migrants. She described running and hiding when Mexican immigration police came through towns they were passing through, keeping Miguel quiet by covering his mouth even as he cried in fear. She talked about the river crossing into the United States, how she had been so afraid her children would drown, how she had made them promise that if something happened to her, they would keep going, keep swimming, save themselves. She described finally reaching American soil and collapsing on the ground, holding her children and crying because they had made it. They had actually made it. She talked about the first months in Los Angeles, living in Carlos's tiny one-bedroom apartment, all 6 of them in that small space, trying to find work without proper documentation, dealing with the trauma her children carried, the nightmares, the anxiety, the difficulty adjusting to a completely new culture and language. She described the ongoing fear of deportation, of being sent back to El Salvador, where the gangs would kill them for leaving, for refusing to cooperate, for daring to escape. But Maria also described the hope. She talked about Isabella's first day at an American school, how her daughter had come home crying because it was so different from El Salvador, but also because she felt safe, because there were no gang members outside the gates, because she could learn without fear. She described Diego slowly coming out of his shell, starting to smile again, making friends, joining the robotics club at school, and discovering a passion for engineering. She talked about Sophia's joy at having access to a library, at being able to check out as many books as she wanted, at discovering that she loved science and mathematics. She described Miguel playing soccer in a park without fear, running and laughing like the child he should have been all along but hadn't been able to be in El Salvador. "My children are thriving," Maria said, her voice filled with pride and wonder. "Despite everything they have been through, despite all the trauma and loss and fear, they are thriving. Isabella is at the top of her class. Diego is excelling in advanced mathematics. Sophia reads at a college level. Miguel is just happy. Mr. Harvey, he is a happy child. And that alone, seeing my baby boy happy and safe, that makes every sacrifice worth it." Steve listened to all of this, and then he asked the question that had been bothering him. "Maria, you said you're still working 3 jobs, still paying back the loan sharks. How much do you still owe them?" Maria's expression darkened. "About $18,000, Mr. Harvey. The interest they charge, it is criminal. I have paid them over $20,000 already in the 3 years since we left, but the debt barely goes down because of how they calculate the interest. They also threaten my brother Carlos. calling him and demanding money, saying they will hurt him or hurt my family still in El Salvador if I do not pay. It is a burden that never ends. Steve looked at the producers who were in the room. We need to do something about this. We can't just hear this story and do nothing. This woman sold everything she owned to save her children's lives, and she's being exploited by criminals. We have to help. The producers nodded in agreement, but they cautioned that they needed to think carefully about how to help in a way that was meaningful and responsible. They didn't want to just throw money at the problem without addressing the larger issues Maria and her family faced. Over the next week, Family Feud worked with immigration attorneys, financial advisors, and social service organizations to put together a comprehensive support package for the Santos family. They arranged for pro bono legal representation to help Maria and her children with their immigration status, working toward legal residency and eventually citizenship. They connected Maria with a nonprofit organization that helped immigrant families deal with predatory lenders, and that organization negotiated with the loan sharks to settle Maria's debt for a fraction of what she owed, threatening legal action if the lenders continued their harassment. Family Feud agreed to pay off the negotiated debt amount, freeing Maria from that burden. They also set up a fund to cover Isabella's college expenses that her scholarship didn't include, ensuring that Maria's oldest daughter could attend UCLA without the family taking on new debt. They arranged for mental health services for all 4 children, recognizing that the trauma they had experienced would require professional support to fully process and heal from. And they did something else, something that would have long-term impact beyond just the Santos family. Steve Harvey announced that he was partnering with several immigration advocacy organizations to create a scholarship and support fund for children of undocumented immigrants who were excelling academically despite the challenges they day in re-10 faced. The fund would be called Maria's Promise, honoring Maria's commitment to her children and extending that promise to other families in similar situations. When it came time to resume the Family Feud taping, the atmosphere in the studio was completely different from any normal game show environment. The audience had been briefed on Maria's story, and when the Santos family returned to the stage, they received a standing ovation that lasted over 5 minutes. People were crying and clapping simultaneously, overwhelmed by Maria's courage and sacrifice. Steve addressed the cameras directly before resuming the game. Ladies and gentlemen, we just heard from Maria Santos, a mother who sold everything she owned to save her children's lives. And I need to say something about that. We live in a country where immigration is one of the most divisive political issues, where people have strong opinions about who should be allowed to come here and who shouldn't. But I want you to forget about politics for a moment and just think about Maria as a mother. Think about what you would do if your children were being threatened with death, if gangs were trying to force your son to become a killer, if your daughters weren't safe walking down the street. Would you stay and watch them die? Or would you do whatever it took, sell everything you owned, risk everything you had to get them to safety? Because that's what Maria did. She made a choice that no parent should ever have to make, and she made it out of pure love for her children. Steve continued, his voice passionate and forceful. Maria and her children are not statistics. They're not political talking points. They're human beings who were fleeing violence and seeking safety. And they represent thousands, maybe millions, of families who have made similar journeys, who have sacrificed everything for the chance at a better life. I don't care what your political beliefs are. I don't care how you feel about immigration policy in the abstract. But I challenge anyone watching this to look at Maria Santos, to hear her story, and to not feel compassion, to not recognize the fundamental human desire to protect your children that transcends borders and politics and everything else. He turned to Maria. Maria, you said you sold everything for your children's lives, and I'm here to tell you that what you bought with that sacrifice was not just their lives, but their futures, their educations, their dreams, their potential. Isabella is going to UCLA, Diego is going to be an engineer, Sophia is going to be a doctor, Miguel is going to grow up safe and happy. That's what you bought, and that is priceless. The audience erupted in applause again. Maria was crying, her children were crying, even some of the Chen family members who had been standing respectfully to the side were crying. The game eventually resumed, though everyone understood it was secondary to what had just occurred. The Santos family played their steal attempt, And Maria gave the answer they had agreed on. Everything. As in, a parent might sell everything to pay for their child's education or future. It wasn't on the board because the survey hadn't asked about desperate immigrant parents fleeing violence. It had asked about typical American parents making normal sacrifices for education expenses. The Santos family didn't win that round on the technicality, but Steve Harvey made an executive decision. You know what? I'm going to give this round to the Santos family anyway, he announced. Because Maria's answer was more true, more real, more important than any survey answer could ever be. She sold everything, and that deserves to be recognized and rewarded. The Chen family immediately agreed, applauding the decision and showing grace and compassion that spoke to their own character. The game continued with the Santos family having been given the round, and they went on to win the overall game, advancing to Fast Money. When it came time for Fast Money, Maria and Isabella played together, mother and daughter, side by side. They didn't have the highest score ever recorded, but they won, and when the final points were revealed and the audience erupted in cheers, it felt like so much more than a game show victory. It felt like vindication, like justice, like recognition of everything Maria had endured and overcome. When the episode aired 6 weeks later, the response was unprecedented. The clip of Maria's confession went viral immediately, viewed over 100 million times across all social media platforms within the first week. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with people from across the political spectrum expressing admiration for Maria's sacrifice and love for her children. Yes, there were some negative comments, people who focused on immigration status rather than human suffering, but they were drowned out by the flood of support and compassion. Immigration advocacy organizations used Maria's story to put a human face on policy debates, to remind people that behind every statistic was a real person, a real family, making impossible choices in desperate circumstances. Parents across America and around the world shared the clip with their children, using Maria's story to teach about gratitude, sacrifice, and the privileges that come with being born in a safe, stable country. The story sparked broader conversations about gang violence in Central America, about the root causes that drive migration, about U.S. policy toward El Salvador and other nations plagued by violence, and about comprehensive immigration reform that might address these complex issues more humanely and effectively. For the Santos family themselves, life changed dramatically after the episode aired. The legal assistance Family Feud arranged allowed Maria and her children to apply for asylum based on the gang violence they had fled, and their case was strong enough that they were granted temporary protected status while their asylum claim was processed. This meant they could work legally, which removed the constant fear of deportation and exploitation that had shadowed their lives. Maria was able to quit 2 of her 3 jobs, working just 1 full-time job instead of 3 part-time ones, which meant she actually had time to sleep, to be present with her children, to heal from the exhaustion that had defined her existence for 3 years. Isabella started at UCLA the following fall, the first person in her family to attend university, carrying with her the hopes and dreams of her mother and siblings. She studied political science and immigration law, determined to help other families like hers navigate the complex and often cruel immigration system. Diego continued to excel in school, his robotics team winning regional competitions, and his passion for engineering growing stronger. He dreamed of one day building infrastructure in El Salvador that might help make his home country safer, so that future families wouldn't have to flee as his had. Sophia pursued her love of medicine, volunteering at a community health clinic that served immigrant families and seeing firsthand how healthcare access could be a matter of life and death for people without documentation or resources. She wanted to be a doctor who served communities like the one she came from, who understood the barriers her patients faced because she had faced them herself. Miguel simply enjoyed being a child, playing soccer, making friends, going to school without fear, living the childhood that had been stolen from him in El Salvador but that his mother's sacrifice had given back to him. He didn't remember as much of the journey as his siblings did, but he understood that his mother had done something extraordinary to bring them to safety, and he loved her fiercely for it. Maria herself slowly healed, physically and emotionally, from the years of trauma and exhaustion. She attended a support group for immigrant women who had fled violence, finding community and understanding with women who had made similar journeys and similar sacrifices. She began to smile more to carry less of the constant tension and fear that had defined her existence. She started to allow herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay, that the future she had sacrificed everything for was actually within reach. 2 years after the Family Feud appearance, Steve Harvey invited the Santos family back for a follow-up special. The change in them was remarkable. Maria looked younger, healthier, less burdened. The children had all grown and thrived in visible ways. Isabella, now 20, spoke about her experiences at UCLA and her plans to attend law school. Diego, 18, had just been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship to study engineering. Sophia, 15, had started a mentoring program for younger immigrant students at her school, helping them adjust and succeed academically. Miguel, 12, was thriving on his school soccer team and talking about maybe trying out for regional competitive teams. Mr. Harvey, Maria said during the taping, 2 years ago, when I stood on your stage and confessed what I had done, what I had sold to bring my children here, I was so afraid. I was afraid people would judge me, would hate me, would say I was a criminal for coming to this country without permission. But instead, people showed me compassion. They showed me that they understood a mother's love transcends borders and laws and politics. They reminded me that I am not alone, that there are good people everywhere who recognize the humanity in others. She continued, tears in her eyes, but her voice strong. You changed our lives, Mr. Harvey, not just because of the financial help, though that was enormous, and we are so grateful, but because you gave me a space to tell my truth, and you honored that truth instead of dismissing it or politicizing it. You saw me as a mother first, before you saw me as an immigrant. And that gave me my dignity back, my sense of worth that I had lost somewhere along the way because I had internalized the message that people like me are not wanted, are not valued. You reminded me that I did something brave and loving, not something shameful, and that has healed me in ways I cannot fully express. Steve Harvey was crying again, just as he had 2 years earlier. Maria, you gave me something too. You reminded me that television can be more than entertainment. You showed me that creating space for people to tell their truth, their real truth, can change lives and change hearts. I'm a better person for having met you and your family, and I'm honored to have been part of your story. The special episode also featured updates on the Maria's Promise Scholarship Fund, which had now helped over 60 children of undocumented immigrants attend college. Several scholarship recipients were in the audience, and they stood to thank Maria for inspiring the fund that had made their own educations possible. One young woman, a sophomore at Stanford studying medicine, spoke directly to Maria. Miss Santos, my family came from Guatemala when I was 8 years old, fleeing similar violence to what you faced. My mother made similar sacrifices, selling everything we owned for the chance at safety. But we never talked about it, never acknowledged what she had given up, because there was so much shame attached to being undocumented, so much fear. When I saw your Family Feud episode, when I saw you speak your truth so bravely, it gave my mother permission to tell her own story, and it allowed me to fully appreciate what she had done for me instead of taking it for granted. So thank you. Thank you for your courage, for your honesty, for representing all the mothers like mine who make impossible sacrifices that often go unrecognized and unappreciated. Maria embraced the young woman, both of them crying. 2 generations of immigrant daughters connected by shared experience and gratitude for mothers who had risked everything for their children's futures. The episode concluded with Steve making another announcement. Maria, when you first came on Family Feud, you were working 3 jobs, trying to pay off debt and survive. You've come so far since then, and I'm proud of you. But I want to do something more. I want to make sure that you never have to worry about money for your children's education again. So I'm personally establishing a trust fund for Sophia and Miguel's college educations so that when they're ready to go to university, the money will be there. Your 2 oldest are taken care of with scholarships, but I want to make sure your younger 2 have the same opportunities. Maria collapsed into Steve's arms, sobbing with relief and gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, she managed to say through her tears. You have given my children the future I dreamed of, but didn't know how to provide. You have given me peace, Mr. Harvey, peace I haven't felt since before my husband died. How do I thank you for that? Steve held her and said simply, "You thank me by continuing to be the remarkable mother you are. You thank me by watching your children succeed and thrive. You thank me by knowing that your sacrifice was seen, was valued, was honored. That's all the thanks I need." 5 years after Maria's confession on Family Feud, all four of her children were thriving beyond what she had dared to hope when she sold everything to bring them to America. Isabella had graduated from UCLA and was in her second year of law school, specializing in immigration law and already working with nonprofit organizations to represent asylum seekers. Diego was excelling at MIT. His engineering projects focused on sustainable infrastructure for developing nations. Sophia was preparing to apply to colleges with dreams of becoming a doctor who served underserved immigrant communities. Miguel was a happy, well-adjusted teenager who played competitive soccer and had a large group of friends. Living the normal teenage life, his mother had sacrificed everything to give him. Maria had become an advocate in her own right, speaking at immigration reform rallies and sharing her story with lawmakers, always emphasizing that behind every immigration statistic was a human being, a family, a story of love and sacrifice and survival. She had been granted permanent residency and was on the path towards citizenship, no longer living in fear of deportation, no longer carrying the burden of being undocumented. She had reconnected with extended family in El Salvador through video calls, staying connected to her roots while building a life in her new home. She had even started dating, allowing herself to hope for companionship and love again after years of being too exhausted and traumatized to think about her own needs beyond survival. The loan sharks who had exploited her were no longer a threat, and she was free from the debt that had hung over her for years. She worked one job that she actually enjoyed, at a community center serving immigrant families, using her own experience to help others navigate the challenges she had faced. Her life wasn't perfect. She still struggled with trauma from everything she had experienced, still worried about her children, still missed her husband and the life they had planned to build together before violence destroyed their dreams. But she was healing, and her children were safe, and that was everything. As we close this powerful story, I want you to think about the parents in your life, the sacrifices they made that you might not fully know or appreciate, the ways they protected you and provided for you even when it cost them dearly. Maria Santos showed us what maternal love looks like at its most fierce and desperate, a mother willing to sell everything she owned, to risk death crossing deserts and rivers, to work herself to exhaustion, all for the chance to save her children's lives. She showed us that behind immigration statistics are real families making impossible choices in desperate circumstances, that the people crossing borders are often not criminals or opportunists, but parents doing what any of us would do to protect our children from violence and death. If this story has moved you, if it's changed how you think about immigration, about sacrifice, about the lengths parents will go to protect their children, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might not understand what drives families to flee their homes and risk everything for the chance at safety, someone who needs to be reminded that compassion should transcend politics and that we are all fundamentally human beings deserving of dignity and understanding. Maria walked onto a game show stage intending to play a fun game with her children, and instead she gave a confession that revealed the brutal reality of what immigrant families endure and sacrifice. She showed us that a mother's love knows no borders, that it will overcome any obstacle, sell any possession, risk any danger to save her children. Thank you, Maria Santos, for your courage, your sacrifice, and your unwavering love for your children. Your story will continue to inspire and challenge people for years to come, reminding us all of the price some families pay for safety and the extraordinary strength of mothers who will give up everything to give their children a future.